For 3 weeks, humanity said nothing. The galaxy waited for their response. News channels across 1,000 worlds ran continuous coverage. Experts debated what the humans would do. Some predicted angry speeches. Others expected demands for justice. A few suggested that humanity might try to fight, though everyone agreed that would be foolish. The Vethkai had 6,000 warships. Humanity had perhaps 200, but the humans stayed silent. William Cole sat alone in his house on Earth, watching the last message his wife had ever sent him. He had watched it 400 times already. He knew every word, every pause, every expression on her face. The government had offered him counselors, doctors, anything he needed. He had refused them all. He just wanted to be alone with Catherine's voice. Someone has to take the first step, she said on the screen. Someone has to show them that we're not what they think we are. William closed his eyes and let the tears fall. Across the planet, humanity mourned. Flags flew at half-staff. Candles burned in windows. People who had never met the crew of the Horizon's Edge wept for them anyway. The 12 ambassadors had been ordinary people with ordinary lives, and now they were gone. But beneath the grief, something else was growing. Something hot and sharp and dangerous. Admiral Nathan Price felt that anger more than most. He was 63 years old, a veteran of 3 border conflicts, and he had spent his entire career preparing for a war he hoped would never come. Now he sat in the command center of Earth's unified fleet, staring at star maps and thinking about blood. His executive officer, Commander Lisa Grant, entered the room and stood at attention. She was 41, efficient, and fearless. She had served under Price for 15 years. "Admiral," she said, "the Galactic Council is demanding our official response." "They'll get one," Price replied without looking up. "Sir, the Council is pressuring us to accept mediation. The Vethkai are claiming that the attack was a misunderstanding." Price finally turned to face her. His eyes were cold. "A misunderstanding. They shot down an unarmed ship. They murdered 12 ambassadors, and they called us vermin." He stood up slowly. "Tell the Council that humanity is considering its options." On Earth, the United Human Parliament had been in session for 20 days straight. Representatives from every nation, every colony, every station had gathered to decide what humanity would do. The debates were fierce. Some called for diplomacy. Others demanded immediate war. A few even suggested surrender, arguing that humanity could not possibly win against the Vethkai. Prime Minister Daniel Webb listened to all of them. He was 58 years old, a former soldier who had entered politics to prevent wars, not start them. But as he listened to the debates, he felt something shifting inside him. He thought about Catherine Cole. He thought about her last words. He thought about what it meant to be human in a galaxy that considered them vermin. On the 21st day, he finally spoke. "We have 2 choices," he said, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "We can accept this crime. We can bow our heads and show the galaxy that humanity can be slaughtered without consequence. We can teach every species out there that our lives mean nothing." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Or we can remind them why our ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and themselves. We can show them what happens when you push humanity too far." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, every nation agreed on something. War. What followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity did not prepare for war the way other species did. They did not spend years building ships and training soldiers. They had no time for that. Instead, they transformed. Factories that had built cars and appliances switched to producing weapons and armor. Shipyards that had constructed cargo vessels began turning out warships. Mining companies donated their entire fleets to be converted into combat vessels. Generation ships that had been carrying colonists to distant worlds were emptied and transformed into carriers. Civilians volunteered by the millions. Old soldiers came out of retirement. Scientists abandoned their research to develop new weapons. Engineers worked without sleep to upgrade every ship in the fleet. Admiral Price watched the reports coming in from across human space. Every day brought more ships, more weapons, more soldiers. The numbers were still far below what the Vethkai had, but they were growing fast. How are we doing this? Commander Grant asked one evening, staring at the fleet reports in disbelief. Price shook his head slowly. We're human. When we decide to do something, we do it. No matter the cost. The Vethkai watched from afar. Their intelligence network reported increased human activity, but their analysts dismissed it as panic. They have perhaps 200 combat-capable vessels, the Vethkai War Minister told his council. Even if they double that number, we outnumber them 30 to 1. Let them come. It will be over in days. They did not know about the mining ships with weapons welded to their hulls. They did not know about the passenger liners converted into troop transports. They did not know about the prototype weapons that human scientists had been developing in secret for decades. They did not know that humanity was not preparing for a war. Humanity was preparing for a reckoning. On the 22nd day of silence, Admiral Price finally gave the galaxy its answer. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Vigil, and broadcast a message on all frequencies. To the Vethkai Dominion, he said, his voice calm and cold. 3 weeks ago, you murdered our ambassadors. You broke the only law that matters. You called us vermin. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with barely controlled fury. You wanted to see what vermin can do? Look up at your skies. We're coming. He cut the transmission. Behind him, Commander Grant studied the tactical display showing their fleet's position. Over 400 human ships were in formation, with more joining every hour. Admiral, she said quietly, we're still outnumbered. Price nodded. Numbers don't win wars, Commander. Will does. He turned to face his crew. Every person in this fleet knows we might not come back. They volunteered anyway. Every ship out there is crewed by people who lost friends, family, fellow humans in that attack. The Vethkai think this is about politics or territory or pride. He shook his head slowly. It's not. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity protects its own, no matter the cost. The fleet began to move. Across human space, other fleets did the same. 37 strike groups, each commanded by officers who had accepted that they might die, launched toward Vethkai territory. The silence was over. The storm was coming. The galaxy had one rule that nobody could break. For 3,000 years, every species followed it without question. The rule was simple. Never harm an ambassador. Diplomats were protected. Messengers were safe. This law had stopped countless wars before they could begin. It allowed 1,000 different species to live together. Among the stars, they called it the Covenant of First Contact. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 40 years ago. They were young compared to the ancient civilizations that ruled the stars. Humans were still learning how things worked out here. They were still figuring out who to trust and who to avoid. But they were eager and hopeful. They believed that friendship was possible with anyone willing to talk. The United Human Parliament chose their best people to represent humanity among the stars. Ambassador Catherine Cole was one of them. She was 52 years old, a former teacher who had spent her life studying languages. She could speak 17 alien tongues fluently. She believed that communication could solve any problem. She believed that every species, no matter how different, could find common ground. Catherine had a husband back on Earth named William. They had been married for 23 years. Every night before she slept, no matter where she was in the galaxy, she would record a message for him. She would tell him about her day, about the strange and wonderful things she had seen, about how much she missed him. William would watch these messages every morning with his coffee. It was their way of staying close across the vast distances of space. Catherine was given command of the diplomatic vessel called the Horizon's Edge. It was a small ship. unarmed, painted white with the symbol of Earth on its hull. 12 other humans served with her. They were translators, cultural experts, and support staff. All of them had volunteered for this mission. All of them believed in what they were doing. The Vethkai Dominion had invited them to their homeworld. The Vethkai were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. They had built an empire spanning 200 star systems. They were tall, scaled beings with 4 arms and eyes that glowed like dying embers. They were proud. They were powerful. And they had never liked humanity. To the Vethkai, humans were an infestation. They bred too quickly. They spread too far. They asked too many questions and showed too little respect for their elders. The Vethkai had argued against allowing humanity into the galactic community. They had lost that argument, but they had never forgotten their anger. Still, the Covenant demanded that they at least pretend to be willing to talk. So they sent an invitation to Earth offering to discuss trade agreements. It was an opportunity that humanity could not refuse. Catherine Cole read the invitation 3 times before accepting it. Something about the wording felt wrong to her. It was too formal, too cold. But she pushed her doubts aside. This was her job. This was what she had trained for. If there was any chance of building a bridge between humans and Vethkai, she had to try. The journey to Korath Prime took 3 weeks. Catherine spent the time studying everything she could about Vethkai culture. She learned their greetings, their customs, their history. She practiced their language until she could speak it without an accent. She wanted them to see that humanity respected them. On the final night before arrival, Catherine recorded her usual message for William. She sat in her small cabin, looking at the camera with tired eyes. "We arrive tomorrow," she said. "I won't lie to you, Will. I'm nervous. The Vethkai have never been friendly to us. But maybe that's exactly why this mission matters. Someone has to take the first step. Someone has to show them that we're not what they think we are." She paused and smiled softly. "I'll call you as soon as I can. I love you. Always." She sent the message and went to sleep. The next morning, the Horizon's Edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Korath system. Catherine stood on the bridge, watching the view screen as the Vethkai homeworld grew larger. It was a beautiful planet, covered in red forests and silver oceans. 3 moons orbited it like silent guardians. "Transmit the standard greeting protocols," Catherine ordered. Her communications officer, a young man named Stephen Park, nodded and sent the message. A moment later, a response came back. "Diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge, you are cleared to approach. Proceed to landing coordinates being transmitted now." Catherine let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. So far, so good. The ship descended through the atmosphere. Catherine could see the capital city below, a sprawling maze of towers and domes. Vethkai vessels flew in formation around them, escorting them to the landing site. She turned to her crew and smiled. "This is it. Remember your training. Be respectful. Be patient. We're making history today." They were 2 minutes from landing when everything changed. Stephen Park frowned at his console. "Ambassador, I'm detecting weapons charging on the escort vessels." Catherine's blood went cold. "What? That's impossible. We're a diplomatic ship. We have no weapons." "They're locking on to us," Stephen said, his voice rising with fear. "Ambassador, they're going to fire." Catherine grabbed the communication controls. "Vethkai Escort, this is Ambassador Cole. Please respond. We are an unarmed diplomatic vessel. We are here at your invitation. Please confirm your intentions." There was no response. The first shot hit the Horizon's Edge in the engine section. The ship shuddered violently. Alarms screamed throughout the corridors. Catherine was thrown to the floor as a second shot tore through the hull. "Mayday, mayday." Stephen shouted into the radio. "This is the Horizon's Edge. We are under attack. We are unarmed." "Repeat, We are unarmed. A third shot. A fourth. The ship began to fall from the sky. Trailing fire and smoke. Catherine pulled herself up and stumbled to the communication console. She had to send a message. She had to tell someone what was happening. Her hands were shaking as she activated the emergency beacon. "They're firing on us," she said, her voice breaking. "We have no weapons. We came in peace." Tears ran down her face as the ship broke apart around her. "Tell my husband The transmission cut off. The horizon's edge hit the ground in a ball of flame. There were no survivors. 12 humans. 12 ambassadors. Murdered in cold blood. 1 hour later, the Vethkai Supreme Council released a statement to the entire galaxy. Their speaker stood before the cameras with no shame, no regret, and no fear. "The human infestation has been addressed," he announced. "We recognize no law that protects vermin." They expected the galaxy to do nothing. They expected humanity to weep and complain and eventually accept what had happened. They did not understand what they had done. They did not know what was coming. The Vethkai had prepared for a defensive war. They knew the humans would come eventually. They positioned their 6,000 warships in careful formations around their most important systems. Their admirals created plans for every possible attack. Their soldiers trained day and night. They were ready for anything. Or so they thought. Captain Ryan Hughes commanded the strike group assigned to attack the Vethkai shipyards at Kara Station. He was 34 years old, a career officer who had never expected to see real combat. His ship, the Defiant Hope, was a light cruiser with a crew of 120 souls. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "we're approaching the target. Enemy fleet is in defensive formation. They have us outnumbered 4-1. Hughes studied the display. The Vethkai ships were waiting exactly where intelligence had predicted. They looked confident, prepared, unafraid. He smiled grimly. They don't know what's about to happen. Across Vethkai space, 36 other strike groups were having similar conversations. The humans had not come to fight a traditional war. They had come to break the Vethkai military so completely that it would never threaten anyone again. The first attack hit the Karath Station shipyards at exactly midnight, local time. Hughes led his ship straight into the enemy formation, ignoring all the rules of space combat that every military academy taught. His ships did not try to outmaneuver the Vethkai. They did not try to find advantageous positions. They simply charged forward, firing everything they had. The Vethkai commanders were shocked. No species fought like this. It was suicide, but the humans kept coming. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos led her squadron against the military academies on Vethkai Prime's third moon. Her ships were old, converted cargo vessels with weapons barely capable of threatening a real warship. She had 42 ships against 300 defenders. "All units," she broadcast to her squadron, "remember why we're here. Remember the horizon's edge. Remember Catherine Cole." Her ships tore into the enemy formation like wolves among sheep. They used tactics that no one had ever seen before. They flew too close to the Vethkai vessels, making it impossible for the enemy to use their heavy weapons without hitting their own ships. They rammed damaged vessels into enemy formations. They deployed nuclear weapons at point-blank range. Maria's ship was one of the first to die. A Vethkai cruiser caught her with a full broadside, tearing her vessel in half. But before her ship exploded, she managed to send one final order. "Don't stop. Don't retreat. Make them remember us." Her squadron obeyed. When the battle ended 3 hours later, the military academies were burning rubble. Maria's squadron had been reduced to 11 ships. But the Vethkai had lost over 200. Commander Patrick O'Brien targeted the fuel depots that supplied the Vethkai fleet. His mission was considered impossible by every military analyst. The depots were deep in enemy territory, protected by automated defenses and constant patrols. No one expected him to succeed. Patrick did not care about expectations. His strike group spent 2 weeks sneaking through enemy space, avoiding detection, hiding in asteroid fields, and behind gas giants. When they finally reached the fuel depots, they attacked without warning and without mercy. The explosions lit up the sky for millions of miles. Enough fuel to power the Vethkai fleet for a year burned in a single night. Patrick lost half his ships in the attack. He himself was badly wounded when his bridge took a direct hit. But as he was carried to the medical bay, he smiled through the blood on his face. "That's for Catherine," he whispered. Back at Korath Station, Captain Hughes was fighting for his life. His ship had taken 17 hits. 3 of his decks were exposed to space. Half his crew was dead or wounded. But he refused to retreat. "Captain," his tactical officer said, voice shaking with fear, "3 Vethkai cruisers are closing on our position. We can't win this fight." Hughes looked at the display. His ship was crippled. His weapons were failing. His engines were barely functioning. Any reasonable commander would surrender or flee. Hughes was not feeling reasonable. "We don't need to win," he said quietly. "We just need to make them bleed." He opened a channel to his surviving crew. "All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for ramming speed. It has been an honor serving with you." No one argued. No one begged for mercy. Every surviving member of his crew simply acknowledged the order and prepared to die. The Defiant Hope accelerated toward the enemy cruisers. The Vethkai captains could not believe what they were seeing. They fired everything they had at the charging human vessel. Explosions tore through the Defiant Hope's hull. Whole sections of the ship broke away, but still it came. The first impact destroyed the Defiant Hope and the cruiser it hit. The explosion was so powerful that it damaged the second cruiser badly enough to take it out of the fight. And the third cruiser, trying to avoid the wreckage, flew directly into a field of debris that tore its engines apart. 3 enemy ships, destroyed by one crippled human vessel that refused to surrender. This scene repeated itself across Vethkai space. Human ships that should have fled instead charged forward. Human soldiers that should have surrendered fought to the last breath. Human pilots that could have escaped instead guided their burning vessels into enemy hangars. The Vethkai had expected to fight a war against a weaker enemy. They had expected easy victories and minimal losses. They had expected humans to behave like every other species they had ever faced. They were wrong. Within 72 hours, the Vethkai had lost 4,000 ships. Their shipyards were destroyed. Their fuel reserves were gone. Their military academies were ash. Their carefully planned defensive formations had been torn apart by an enemy that simply refused to follow the rules. The Vethkai Supreme Council watched the reports coming in with growing horror. This was not supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be weak. Humans were supposed to be afraid. Humans were supposed to know their place. How is this possible? The Vethkai War Minister demanded. "They are insects. They are nothing." His aide showed him the latest casualty figures. Human losses were staggering. Nearly 60% of their attacking forces had been destroyed. But they had killed far more than they had lost. And more human ships were arriving every hour. "They're not fighting to win," the aide said quietly. "They're fighting to hurt us. They don't care if they die, as long as we die too." The war minister stared at the numbers in disbelief. He had studied warfare for 200 years. He had fought against a dozen different species. He had never seen anything like this. "What kind of creatures are they?" he whispered. Outside his window, the sky was full of fire. Human ships were everywhere now, cutting through the Vethkai defenses like knives through flesh. The blood tide had arrived, and it was just beginning. Admiral Nathan Price brought the main fleet to Korath Prime on the 5th day of the war. His flagship, the Eternal Vigil, led a formation of nearly 800 human vessels. Many of them were damaged from earlier battles. All of them were low on ammunition. Every crew member had been awake for days, but they had come anyway. Korath Prime hung in space before them, a beautiful world of red forests and silver oceans. The Vethkai homeworld. The place where the Supreme Council had given the order to murder 12 human ambassadors. The place where this war would end, one way or another. The planet was not defenseless. 2,000 Vethkai warships formed a wall between the humans and their homeworld. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons. Ground-based cannons pointed toward the sky. The Vethkai had gathered everything they had left to protect their home. Commander Lisa Grant stood beside Admiral Price on the bridge, studying the enemy formation. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp. "Admiral," she said, "even at full strength, we couldn't break that formation. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of position." Price nodded slowly. He had known this moment was coming. He had prepared for it. But that did not make it any easier. "We're not going to break it," he said. "We're going to go through it." Grant looked at him. She understood what he meant. They all did. "Send the order," Price continued. "All ships, prepare for final approach. Tell them to remember why we're here. Tell them to make every shot count. Tell them," his voice caught for just a moment. "Tell them I'm proud of them." The order went out across the fleet. 800 ships began their advance toward the Vethkai defensive line. The battle for Korath Prime lasted 18 hours. It was the bloodiest engagement in the history of galactic warfare. The first wave of human ships hit, the Vethkai formation like a hammer striking stone. Explosions filled the space between the two fleets. Ships on both sides were torn apart in seconds. The darkness of space became bright with Fire Captain Amy Richardson commanded the carrier New Phoenix. She was 29 years old, the youngest carrier captain in human history. She had been promoted just 3 weeks ago, after her predecessor was killed in the first wave of attacks. Now she stood on her bridge, watching her fighters launch into the chaos. "Ma'am," her flight coordinator reported, "we've launched everything we have. But there isn't enough deck space to recover them all when they return." Amy nodded. She had known this when she gave the order. "Tell our pilots to fly until their fuel runs out. Then they can find other ways to be useful." Her pilots understood. They flew their fighters until the tanks were empty, then ejected and used hand weapons to attack Vethkai ships from their escape pods. Some of them managed to land on enemy vessels and fight their way inside. Others simply aimed their disabled fighters at enemy bridges and waited for impact. Not one of them retreated. Not one of them surrendered. Admiral Price watched the battle unfold from the Eternal Vigil's bridge. His ship was in the thick of the fighting, taking hits from multiple directions. Damage reports came in constantly. Fires burned on 3 decks. The port weapons array was completely gone. "Admiral," a crewman shouted, "enemy cruiser closing fast on our starboard side." Price turned to give an order, but he never got the chance. A Vethkai torpedo struck the bridge directly. The explosion killed half the bridge crew instantly. Commander Grant was thrown across the room, her body broken by the impact. Admiral Price was knocked to the floor, blood pouring from a wound on his head. For a moment, everything was chaos. Alarms screamed. Smoke filled the air. People called out for help in the darkness. Then Price pulled himself to his feet. His uniform was torn and burned. His face was covered in blood. But his eyes were clear. "Damage report," he demanded. A young ensign, barely 20 years old, was the only officer still at her station. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Bridge is gone, sir." "Commander Grant is." She stopped, unable to finish. Price looked at Lisa's body. She had served with him for 15 years. She had been his friend. And now she was gone. He closed his eyes for just a moment. Then he opened them again. "Transfer my flag to the Relentless," he ordered. "And tell the fleet to keep fighting." He made his way through the damaged ship, stepping over bodies and debris. A medical team tried to stop him, to treat his wounds. He pushed them away. There would be time for healing later. If there was a later, the shuttle that carried him to the Relentless flew through a storm of weapons fire. Twice they nearly collided with burning wreckage. 3 times they were hit by stray shots. But somehow they made it. Admiral Price stepped onto the bridge of the Relentless and immediately took command. The ship was a damaged frigate with a crew of only 50. It was barely fit for combat. But it was still flying, and that was enough. Status of the battle, he demanded. The captain of the Relentless, a young woman named Sarah Blake, showed him the tactical display. We've broken through the first 2 defensive lines, but we've lost over 400 ships. The Vethkai still had 1,000 vessels between us and the planet. Price studied the display. His forces were scattered, damaged, dying. By every measure of warfare, they'd already lost, but the humans were still fighting. Order all ships to converge on my position, Price said. We're going to punch through their center. The remaining human ships gathered around the Relentless. 300 vessels, most of them barely holding together. They formed a rough wedge formation with the Admiral's ship at the tip. All ships, Price broadcast. This is Admiral Price. In a few minutes, we're going to charge the center of the Vethkai fleet. Many of us will not survive, but those who do will reach Korath Prime. We will make the Vethkai answer for what they did. He paused. Remember Catherine Cole. Remember the 12. Remember why we came here. And show them what humanity can do. The wedge began to move. The Vethkai threw everything they had at the advancing humans. Ships exploded by the dozen. The space around the wedge became a wall of fire. But the humans did not stop. They could not stop. They had come too far to turn back now. The Relentless took hit after hit. Sections of the ship broke away. Crew members died at their stations. But Price stood on the bridge, refusing to leave, refusing to fall. Almost there, Sarah Blake reported, her voice tight with pain. She had been wounded by shrapnel, but refused to leave her post. We're almost through. One final Vethkai cruiser moved to block their path. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Relentless. Its weapons charged, preparing to destroy the human flagship once and for all. Price looked at the enemy ship. Then he looked at his own damaged vessel. He made a decision. All hands, brace for impact. Ram that cruiser. The Relentless accelerated toward the enemy vessel. The Vethkai captain tried to move out of the way, but it was too late. The human frigate struck the cruiser, amidships at full speed. Both ships exploded, but the path to Korath Prime was clear. The surviving human ships, barely 200 now, poured through the gap. The Vethkai fleet was broken, scattered, defeated. Below them, the homeworld of their enemy lay defenseless. Admiral Price, somehow still alive in an escape pod, broadcast one final message. Vethkai Supreme Council, you have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. If you refuse, I will reduce your cities to ash. Not because I want to, because you taught us that some crimes can only be answered with fire. The galaxy held its breath. The hour began to count down. The Vethkai Supreme Council gathered in their ancient meeting chamber, deep beneath the surface of Korath Prime. They were 12 beings, the oldest and most powerful of their kind. For 3,000 years, their ancestors had ruled this empire. They had conquered 100 worlds. They had crushed a dozen rebellions. They had never surrendered to anyone. The High Counselor, a massive Vethkai with scales that had turned white with age, looked at the message from the human admiral. His forearms trembled with rage. They dare to threaten us? He growled. These insects? These vermin? We will never bow to creatures such as them. High Counselor, one of the younger council members said carefully, our fleet is destroyed. We have nothing left to fight with. Perhaps we should what? Surrender? Admit that we were wrong? The High Counselor slammed his fists on the table. We did what needed to be done. Humans are a plague upon the galaxy. History will prove us right. The debate continued for 45 minutes. Some council members wanted to fight. Others wanted to negotiate. A few quietly suggested evacuation. In the end, the High Counselor's voice was the loudest. Send our response, he commanded. Tell the humans that the Vethkai Dominion will never surrender to vermin. Tell them to do their worst. We are not afraid of them. The message was sent. Admiral Price, now aboard the destroyer Silent Justice, received it 5 minutes before his deadline expired. He read the words slowly, letting them sink in. They refused to surrender, he said quietly. Captain Sarah Blake, who had somehow survived the destruction of the Relentless in another escape pod, stood beside him. Her arm was in a sling, and half her face was covered in bandages. But she was still on her feet. Admiral, what do we do? Price was silent for a long moment. He thought about Catherine Cole. He thought about the 12 ambassadors who had died. He thought about the thousands of human soldiers who had given their lives to reach this moment. He thought about what humanity had become in the past. Few weeks. Then he thought about the millions of ordinary Vethkai who lived on the planet below. Workers, farmers, teachers, children. People who had never done anything wrong. People who had simply been born into a society led by monsters. Target the Supreme Council building, he ordered. Only the council building. Nothing else. Blake looked at him with surprise. Sir, after everything they did? We're not them, Price said firmly. We didn't come here to commit genocide. We came here to deliver justice. He opened a channel to the planet below. People of Karath Prime, this is Admiral Nathan Price of the United Human Fleet. Your leaders have refused to surrender. In 55 minutes, I will destroy the Supreme Council building. Only the Council building. All civilians in the surrounding area should evacuate immediately. Humanity does not murder civilians, but we do not forgive those who murder ours. He closed the channel and sat back in his chair. For the next 55 minutes, the human fleet waited in orbit. Below them, the people of Karath Prime scrambled to evacuate the area around the government complex. Thousands of Vethkai fled their homes, looking up at the sky in terror. The Supreme Council did not move. They sat in their meeting chamber, confident that their bunker would protect them from anything the humans could throw. They were wrong. At exactly 1 hour after the ultimatum, a single human warhead descended from orbit. It was not a large weapon by human standards. It was not designed to destroy cities or kill millions. It was designed for precision. It was designed for justice. The Supreme Council building vanished in nuclear fire. The bunker beneath it provided no protection. The 12 Vethkai, who had ordered the murder of human ambassadors, died in less than a second. Then the shooting stopped. Admiral Price broadcast a final message to the galaxy. His voice was tired but clear. The Vethkai Dominion's leadership has been held accountable for their crime against the Covenant of First Contact. The Vethkai people are not our enemies. They never were. Their leaders chose to break the one law that kept us all safe. We have answered that choice. He paused. Let the galaxy remember, humanity does not start wars, but we end them. The Galactic Council convened 3 days later. For the first time in history, every species sent representatives, not because it was required, but because they needed to see the humans who had dismantled an ancient empire in just over a week. Ambassador Gregory Palmer represented humanity at the meeting. He was 40 years old, a former diplomat who had served with Catherine Cole early in his career. He had volunteered for this assignment the moment he heard about the massacre. As he walked into the council chamber, every eye in the room turned toward him. He could feel their fear, their confusion, their respect. He could feel them trying to understand what humanity was. He stood before the assembly and began to speak. We did not want this war, he said. Ambassador Catherine Cole went to Korath Prime to offer friendship. She went there to build bridges. She went there believing that even the Vethkai could learn to see us as equals. They answered her hope with murder. They broke the covenant of first contact. They called us vermin. He paused, looking around the chamber. We will mourn our dead for generations. We will carry the weight of what we did in response for longer still. But let this be understood by every species in this hall. The covenant of first contact is sacred. It protects all of us. If you break it against humanity, we will remind you why that law exists. His voice softened slightly. We are not conquerors. We are not monsters. We are the species that survived everything our own world threw at us. We will survive everything the galaxy throws at us too. And those who come in peace will always find peace with us. Then his voice hardened again. But those who come with violence should prepare for what we will bring in return. The covenant of first contact was renewed that day, with humanity as its primary enforcer. No species would ever again consider harming another's ambassadors. They had seen what happened when humanity was pushed. They had no desire to see it again. 50 years later, a monument stands on Korath Prime. It was built by both humans and Vethkai together, a symbol of the fragile peace that had grown between them. The monument bears the names of the 12 human ambassadors who died aboard the Horizon's Edge. Below their names are the words Catherine Cole spoke in her final transmission. Now completed. Tell my husband I loved him. And tell humanity to be better than this. William Cole visited the monument once, 5 years after it was built. He was an old man by then, his hair white and his steps slow. He stood before his wife's name for a long time, saying nothing. Then he reached out and touched the stone, feeling the letters carved into its surface. I told them, he whispered. I told them everything. Beside the monument sits a small garden, tended by both humans and Vethkai. The two species would never be friends. Too much blood had been spilled for that. But they had learned to respect each other. A respect forged in fire and paid for in lives dot and across the galaxy. When young species asked why the covenant of first contact was so important, older species would tell them the story of humanity. They came to us in peace, they would say. They asked only for friendship.